welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and our guest today is, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Jessica. I'm Camille Pagan. I am the author of 7 novels, most recently, Don't Make Me Turn This Life Around.
And we briefly were speaking before we started recording that you tend to write breezy books about sad things that happen, which I think is great because it's a good balance. Like, you know, a lot of people like to read about these real life things because it makes you feel like you're not alone, and it's, you know, they're important things to discuss and to empathize with and to experience through books. But the voice is very breezy.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about this book and how it all came to be.
Yeah, so I really read, I like to read books that are tackling real life subjects. I don't want it to be so glossy that I can't relate. And so I write books that way too, but I also look at life as though it's pretty funny and a little bit sad. And so I think that if you pick up any one of my books, that's what you'll find. Real things, love, loss, grief, family, all of the above, but all in a way where there's a little bit of a wry humor in there, because I think all situations have a little humor in them. With Don't Make Me Turn This Life Around, it is a follow-up to Life and Other Near-Death Experiences, which is my second novel, but can really be read as a standalone. And it's about a woman named Libby Ross Velasquez. She is a cancer survivor who's just received really good news about her health. And she can't shake her blues. And she can't figure out why. She's thinking, is this a midlife crisis? Why would I be having this? Because my life is really good. You know, I've got 2 healthy girls. One of her daughters has had her own health crisis and come out the other side of it. Her husband, they have a loving marriage, although it's a little stagnant. And she just can't figure out what's going on with her. And I wrote the book at the beginning of the pandemic. And I think that you will find a lot of themes that we were all feeling. You know, aren't I lucky to be alive? Shouldn't that be enough? And so I really brought that to this experience, even though it's a pre-pandemic book.
I was nodding profusely as you were saying that because we don't use video for the podcast for the most part. There are times when we do have a video component. This is not one of them, but yeah, I was nodding because there is so much, I think, that a lot of people are going to be able to relate to. And when you are in a situation where you don't see the outcome so well for other people, but then it is for you, but you are still going through this harrowing experience.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of people will hear things like, look on the bright side. Why are you still so depressed? At least you're not XYZ. And I don't think that it's inherently the intent of the person who says that to be harmful, but at the same time, because things are messy and confusing and everybody processes these traumas in a different way, I think more people do have that feeling of not being able to shake the blues even after surviving something scary.
Yes. I call it toxic positivity. I didn't coin that, but I believe that's what it is. And other people don't understand that it's harmful. And of course, we've all done it at some point where we just said, you know, at least it's not, you know, look on the bright side. Aren't you lucky that all of these things? But to the person who's not feeling good, it just makes you feel worse, because then you're layering on guilt and shame on top of sadness, depression, anxiety, all of that. So I just think about this a lot. I'm finding either you also tackled this. just why are we so reluctant to share our difficulties and our troubles with other people? And I think one of the reasons is because if it looks good on the outside, people assume that that's all there is to it. That should be enough.
Right. And people don't always present what they're feeling in the same
Yeah.
way. There's that stereotypical TV after school special view of addiction and
Yes.
depression. You're addicted and it's like it's manic and everybody can see it, or you're in a bathrobe all day staring at the sky. But that's not what it looks like for, I think, the general public, which makes it difficult for people to seek help when they really, really need it.
Yes.
So, well, first of all, congratulations, because I heard that Life and Other Near-Death Experiences was optioned for a film by Jessica Chastain's company.
Yeah, it was. Thank you. Very
That's
exciting.
awesome.
Thank you.
So tell us about Libby in this book, and when why you decided to continue this story.
Yeah, I never thought that I would write a follow-up, but I was in Vieques, which is an island in Puerto Rico, where life and other near-death experiences and Don't Make Me Turn This Life Around largely take place. My husband is Puerto Rican. We spend our summers in Puerto Rico. We have been for, more than 20 years at this point. It really is my second home. And so we were there August of 2019. We'd finally brought our kids to this tiny little island that's really magical. So excited to show them. We were like, oh, they'll see the horses, the black sand beach, the bioluminescent bay. They're just amazing things in Vieques. And of course, the minute we arrived, the storm clouds started rolling in. And it just did not stop raining for a week. There was a tropical storm. And that's really unusual for Puerto Rico. Storms come and go, even in hurricane season. And so now if you ask my kids about that trip, they'll just tell you about the storm that they survived. And yet it was really, really good for our family in unexpected ways. And so on one of the last days that I was there, I was staring out at the sea, just thinking about the trip and my life and all of my experiences in Puerto Rico. And this new story with old characters popped into my head. And I thought, oh no, now you've done and got it. Okay. Gone and done it. That's what I'm looking for. And so I pitched this new idea to my editor, who, to my surprise, said, oh yeah, we want to do that. So it was really, 5 years after I published the first book that I began writing the second one. It takes place 13 years later in Libby's life. And for that reason, it really is its own book. You don't need to know the story of life and other near-death experiences to appreciate this character, who's a dyed-in-the-wool optimist, who that's really a coping mechanism for her. Talk about toxic positivity. She had a trauma when she was younger. She reacted by looking at everything through rose-colored glasses. Her brother responded basically the opposite way. He's an extreme pessimist. And that tends to often be the case with trauma. And so she's returning to this coping mechanism and it's not working. And the story really picks up at that point.
Right. And that's sort of what we were talking about before with the look, like you were saying, just like toxic positivity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for an optimist, it's almost turned inside. Like when they say depression is anger turned inward. I have feelings about that because I don't know if it's always anger, although I think anger is simmering within it. But with a situation like Libby's, because she's an optimist and because this is a coping mechanism that she's used.
Yeah.
You're the person who's saying to yourself, look on the bright side, when you know that it's not that easy. So it's not even like you can go home to your husband and be like, oh my God, this jerk at work kept telling me to look on the bright side, and they can't understand what I've been through, and I'm trying to, but it's like you're that person. You're the one
jerk
who's doing that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm also a coach in addition to being a novelist, and I was a health reporter for 20 years. And something that comes up again and again in the mental health community is the idea that repression really is like pushing a beach ball under the water. It pops up even higher each time. And so repression leads to depression, or it can in some cases. And this is what Libby's finding, is that you can't just pretend it's all okay and then it'll go away. You really have to feel your feelings.
I like that also, one of the things that I'm just reading the blurbs about the book is that you explore what life's supposed to's are. And there's so many people who would go about what's supposed to be. That's like a absolute universal feeling. I'm supposed to have children at this age.
Yep.
I'm supposed to have like a partner at this age. I'm supposed to be crazy in love after 20 years of marriage, but I still love them, but it doesn't feel like it did when we got married, which is actually okay and normal, but not what you're supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Did you want to talk a little bit about how that shapes Libby's story 13 years later?
Yeah, she is absolutely dealing with a lot of the things that you mentioned, expecting something of her marriage that's not there, even though they really love each other. Expecting that her career should feel better. She's running a nonprofit that is started in her mother's honor. It's been going really well. They're doing amazing things, and yet she's just not that into it. And she feels terrible because she's supposed to be pursuing this passion project. And again, it's this idea of not facing reality, but clinging to this glossy version of how it's supposed to be. That's really when the trouble begins. Because when you ask yourself, like if I'm working with a client and they tell me it's supposed to be a certain way, I say, well, says who? Is it society or is it you? And when you just look at it through that lens, it suddenly becomes a lot more clear how you can make your own choices for yourself. And that's really empowering.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I love your story of your family's rainy vacation and
Thank
how
you.
what wasn't supposed to be became something special in its own way.
Yeah.
Because I feel if you cling so much to the picture perfect, there's no guarantees in life.
Yeah.
And yeah. So are you working on anything now? And
Yeah.
what is it?
I'm always working on something new. I love my career so much. I just finished a book called Everything Must Go, and it's about three sisters. The middle sister, in particular, returns to her Brooklyn home to help her mother, who may or may not have dementia, and really uncover some secrets that are the key to giving her the life that she wants, but they may break her mother's heart. So it's a really heartfelt Rye book, and I really had a good feeling about this one.
Again, a really difficult but relevant topic.
Thank you.
How long does it take you to write? Did you have trouble writing during the pandemic?
I did. It typically takes me 3 to 4 months to draft a book and then about 3 months to edit it. So it's not like it's all breezy. But writing at the beginning of the pandemic, I think it took me about 5 months to finish the first draft, which is longer than usual, but it was the amount of effort that it took during that 5 months. Um, and I really had to do the work on myself to be like, okay, you've never gone through this before. This is unlike anything you've lived through. So give yourself a break, and continually reminding myself of that. It wasn't like one time, oh, it's okay, just go forth. And still 14 months in, I think we're all doing that to a degree of, this is not normal. I don't want to pretend it's normal. Hopefully it will not become our normal. And so how do I operate in a way that takes care of me? And in my case, protecting my creative self and continuing to produce, because as hard as the work can be at times, for me, I write to figure out how I feel about the world, and it's really restorative too. So I wanted to continue doing that and not drop it just because situation had changed. Yeah.
Sure, and you bring up a lot of really good points in general, and going back to what's supposed to be. I think this is the
Hmm.
first time in current history that collectively everybody can say they really just didn't know what was coming next.
Yeah. Yep.
It wasn't something that was localized. It
Hmm.
wasn't something that affected, you know, like, I think it's easy, especially, you know, in a country that has access to certain things, to look at a tragedy happening elsewhere and being like, oh, that's tragic. But then, you know, you go about your day and you go
Yeah.
shopping and you go to a restaurant with your friend, and you might
Yeah.
feel that tickle in the back of your neck, like, oh, this is horrible, and talk about it. But this was worldwide,
Yeah.
and it was impossible to think about anything else because everything was closed in the beginning.
Yeah.
Kids weren't in school, people weren't at work.
Yeah.
Going to the supermarket, which is like the most mundane task, was a battlefield.
Yeah.
And I don't think people are done processing that even now.
No, no, I think it's going to take a long time. I think in this particular case, because it was global, there was no escaping it.
Mhm.
A lot of times we think if I can just get over here, or I can just do this thing, I can go into my own little bubble. And in a way, that's kind of a healthy coping mechanism, provided that you're not abusing drugs or alcohol or something like that. It's okay to go into your own space and process. But with this, I think the collective feeling is there was no doing that. And you're just stuck in the same place all the time. And so I really, I suspect we'll be unraveling this for years to come.
Yeah, I've been discussing with people a lot about how now there seems to be almost two completely opposing camps to coming out of it. There's the
Yeah.
people who just can't wait to dive in and be like, okay, it's over. And then there's almost like a pandemic induced agoraphobia,
Yeah.
where maybe if you weren't prone to that in the past, you are suddenly just not ready to jump back into what was before.
Yeah.
And I worry that we're not going to be kind to one another when we're getting used to that. And
Yeah.
I think everybody's going to need a little bit more help. So
Yeah.
just be aware of that. That's you know, I know you're aware of that because we're talking about it.
Yeah. Read more books, people. It's good for
read
you.
read more books. So what is your comfort read? And do you get to read a
Oh,
lot? Do you have a comfort read when times are
yeah.
tough?
So I do read a ton because as an author, part of it's not your job, but I really think there's an obligation to read other authors' books. A lot of times you're blurbing, so you're providing that endorsement for them. I know people have been really generous with me, so I try to return that favor for everyone, new authors, established, my peers. So a lot of what I read in any given week is those manuscripts. And then in addition to that, I read whatever catches my eye. It's really a mix of nonfiction and fiction. So I read The Midnight Library recently, love that. It was really good. Lori Colwin is my favorite. If you want to like go to a comfort read, for me, she died in the 90s pretty tragically of heart failure. And she left behind a small collection of books. I think she has maybe 6 or 7 novels and short story collections and a couple of essays collections about cooking. And they're just these lovely domestic stories that for me are comfort food. They're just really, really great. So I return to those again and again.
That's great.
Yeah.
And do you have any, are you working at all with the development of life and other near-death experiences, the media development, or is that pretty much all signed over to the company?
So I'm not. We are still at the stage in which I'm told they're working on the script, and I'm not involved directly in that process, which is probably for the best. I think it'd be fun one day. At this current juncture, no. So I'm
Yeah.
excited, and I just trust that that vision is going to line up with the intent of the story. It's a really emotional book. I don't think I'd ever be the person who is caught up in every detail being the same on the screen. I don't think it usually works that way, and it doesn't bother me at all.
There you go with another supposed to,
Oh yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah, there, which is great. It's always interesting. First of all, I think there's been so many books that have made wonderful media over the past few years. I think adaptation in general has just sort of reached a sweet spot where people are, really looking at what they're adapting in a constructive way and a sensitive way. But I think
Yeah,
we also need to realize that they're adaptations, and certain
yeah,
things that work in a book won't necessarily work the same way on film. And
yep,
hopefully just, respectful adaptations will continue, and we'll continue
yeah.
to get great material. So
I know there's so much good TV and film right now,
so
which is really
much.
a blessing for us in the middle of, hopefully on the tail end, I should say, of this pandemic.
I know it's always hard to say that, because you don't want to be the person to be like, yeah, we're at the end, and then you're like, oh
Yeah,
wait, maybe are we really?
just kidding.
Just kidding. But I do think it does seem like there is some storm clouds parting. So hopefully next time you get back
So
to Puerto Rico,
yeah, we're
there
going
will
this
be no
summer.
storm clouds.
I know. I'm really, yeah, fingers crossed. It's been
Fingers
2 years.
crossed.
Yeah.
So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. I would love to thank our guest today, Camille Pagan.
Thank
Uh,
you. Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure.
and please come back and tell us about your next book when it releases.
I'd love that.
All right, so we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.